Good morning. Thank you very much for the introduction. I apologize to say that probably my talk is going to make the dark side even darker. And the problem of big data is going to become even worse. But hopefully some of the things that Dr. Handel mentioned in his talk, we can use these to help the vulnerable population around us. The title, as you see, is Internet of Things and Emerging Applications. It's going to be a broader discussion. I'm not going to get into too much details. And I'll be happy to answer the questions after we finish all the keynotes. Okay, what I plan to talk about is just to give you a little bit of overview and talk about what really is Internet of Things. Internet of Things was mentioned in the previous talk. And we'll talk about some of the emerging applications and the challenges that we are having, and finally we will summarize. Okay, just to give you a little bit background that how we got there to Internet of Things. Communication technologies over the last few decades have really seen progress by leaps and bounds, and several factors have played a role into this one. One role is, of course, we like to communicate. Human beings are human beings. We like to communicate with each other. And we have always found or have tried to find what can make it easier and faster to communicate. So the trends have been that hardware size has been shrinking. Moore's law is at its best display. And the processing power has been increasing in all these chips over the years. Prices are dropping. So all these factors have really led to creation of more applications. For example, when the first computer was developed in let's say mid-century, 19th century, we couldn't use that computer. That was probably a computer of the room, size of this room. We couldn't use it to control the traffic lights, for example, or rice cooker, or these kind of things. So, but now that they have become small, when the microprocessor was developed in a few decades ago, we found so many applications of microprocessors, and things became a lot easier. Now the things have even shrunk considerably, so we are finding more and more applications. So this trend is actually leading to what I'm going to talk about, Internet of Things. Some applications may look trivial to us, but believe it, we used to think about some of the applications which we consider trivial or very prominent these days. So on a larger scale, we are looking at the applications and technologies which provide ease of use and connectivity, being connected with each other. Mobility has been a big factor, and that has led to a lot of applications, and the control, that how much we can use these technologies under our control to make things happen that we want to happen. Okay. Before I get into this, before I talk about Internet of Things, actually it's better to talk about sensors. Sensors and sensor networks have been around us for a long time, but now, as I mentioned, the size of things are becoming smaller and smaller. So sensor really is a small device that can potentially sense whatever we program it to sense for us, process it, and transmit it somewhere. That's essentially a sensor. Now, they have been of the size of maybe a dime or a nickel, but now they are becoming smaller and smaller to the extent that we can even mix those sensors in a paint and paint it on the wall, and they will do their job. We wouldn't even know that there are sensors on the wall. So talk about the phrase that we always heard, that walls have ears, Well, if you put the sensors in the paint and paint the wall, that's exactly practically there it is, that it will be listening to you what exactly is happening in the room. The question that must be coming to your mind, that how these things are going to be powered. Well, that's a big challenge. And that's a big area of research, that if we are going to have sensors which are so small, how they are going to be powered, and how much power they will need. We'll talk about it. Right now, the sensor that we have, actually, most of the size of the sensor is taken up by the battery. But if that can be eliminated, then size of the sensors could be really, really small. They have been able to reduce it to the size of a grain of rice. So we are coming there. There is actually a professor who started a company called Dust Networks. And they call it, he's focusing on dust because sensors are, they're going to become so small that they will be just like dust particles. And we are naming them as smart dust because they will be all around us and they will be doing the sensing job and keeping an eye on us. So sensors are small devices. They can sense information, convert the information into whatever form, analog to digital, and process the information and communicate. So sensor networks are essentially interconnected sensors. When the sensors are connected to each other, we call them sensor networks. And they can aggregate the information from several sensors can communicate with each other. They can aggregate the information and trigger some decisions through whatever form of actuator, mechanical or non-mechanical devices you can have. They can actually trigger some decisions. There comes the artificial intelligence. Hopefully, it will still be under our control, so it can help us rather than overtake us. Now, Internet of Things is really a pervasive form of sensor networks. There are some subtle differences between sensor networks and Internet of Things, and I will talk about it. Now, the question that comes to your mind probably is, we all know about Internet. We know the things. And what is this Internet of Things? We already know that there's the current Internet that we use all the time. That's also connecting things. Well, I remember, and maybe some of you remember also, the first Internet that came by had 26 nodes, 26. And that was not available to public. That was only used for defense purposes at major universities. And we all know when the first email came around. We all know when the first cellular or mobile telephone was developed. So you can see, probably in the last few decades, things have really come forward. So these are the things that have been connected to Internet. Now there are billions of nodes connected to the Internet. So the things that were not connected before, they are being connected to the Internet. Now, when we talk about Internet of Things, it's really going to go deeper and deeper. Almost, people, to avoid the confusion between the current Internet and the future Internet of Things, people are even suggesting, let's call it Internet of Everything, IOE, rather than IoT. Well, then people worry about, then there will be another acronym called IOU, because there are a lot of money involved, so they are not going to. So Internet of Things, anything that you can imagine around us will potentially be connected to Internet. Even the cup that you're drinking the coffee from, even the knife that you're using at your dinner table, even the chair that you're sitting at, even the wall socket that you're using to power your computer, even the forks and knives that you use, or your bed, or your dishwasher, or your coffee maker, you name it, anything that you can name it, it will potentially be connected to Internet. Well, The concern is why? Well, we will see that, as I mentioned, that this Internet of Things is probably going to make big data problem even worse. This is going to create a lot of information, and a lot of that information is going to be analyzed, and artificial intelligence is going to be at its best display to help us and make the decisions for you. And I will give some examples as we go along. Just imagine a scenario that Internet of Things, as you walk into your home after you go home from your work, it will be able to sense your mood, that what kind of day you have had, and it will turn on the music for you probably according to what you desire to have. It will make the coffee for you or not coffee for you, or kind of prepare a drink for you. The kind of drink will be helpful to make your day a little easier. So those are the kind of things that we are talking about. So I've already mentioned, but here is a definition that I like. This is, of course, by no means final definition. I'm still working on refining it. So Internet of Things refers to a self-organizing, pervasive network of objects. Objects are essentially things, where each object is uniquely identifiable and accessible from anywhere and anytime. Like the chair you are sitting at, if it's connected to internet, it will be part of Internet of Things. Anybody can, from anywhere from the world, or even space for that matter, can see that if that chair is empty or somebody is sitting on it, and if somebody is sitting on it, who is sitting on it, and maybe even eventually that what that person is up to while sitting on the chair. So some of the characteristics, by the way, when I mention self-organizing, these networks are going to have mobility aspects of things will be moving around. So if something moves out of the connectivity circle, then the network by itself will be able to organize and see that who are the neighbors and who they can communicate with directly and who they will have to communicate indirectly with. So that's what I mean by self-organizing. So the characteristics, some of the characteristics, not all of them, include flexible structure. So because the topology is going to be changes because of mobility, this is going to be very helpful in establishing some kind of ambient technologies. That, okay, there are different kind of sensors, for example, this room, they are collecting different kind of information, and they should be able to integrate the information and give some kind of score that, okay, is it a good environment, is not a good environment in this room, et cetera, et cetera. So those kind of ambient technologies can be developed. Low energy consumption is going to be one of the factors, because that is one of the factors that will probably be define that how quickly these can be implemented. Just to give you one example before I go to the next slide, that they are already, as I mentioned, that battery component is determine most of the size of the sensors right now. If that can be eliminated, they can become very small. So they are already talking about that if we can use vibrations to power these sensors. Like if the sensor is on the wall, maybe the air conditioning vibrations can help power those sensors. Maybe a person walks into the room, and just by walking, taking the steps, those vibrations can power these. Maybe piezoelectric, some of you may know that these crystals, these can also be, they vibrate a little bit, and then they create energy. So is this going to be enough energy to power this? Well, these are going to be, remember, these are going to be very small in size, and they will need very little power to power them. And the range of communication is also going to be small, because there will be so many sensors around you, so you will communicate with your neighbors. So there will be not much distance to send your signal to. So energy needs are going to be not that great, not that large. So these little aspects of energy creation can certainly help in powering the Internet of Things. Okay, here are some of the projections. And I just got these from the Internet, not Internet of Things, but Internet. The Internet IoT spending is expected to reach $1.2 trillion by 2022. 2022 is not that far. So you can imagine IoT devices to grow from 6.4 billion, which was in 2016, to about 50 billion by 2020, by next year. Just imagine the rate at which they are increasing. And go to 64 billion by 2025. And I'm sure that probably these estimates will be beaten. 127 new IoT devices are connected every second. 120 second. Now, some time ago, I mean, you may have seen that chart. I wish I had it with me. I would have shown you that how many years it took to have 1 million devices or 1 million devices to be used in an environment like television. It took several years before it reached 1 million. Or microwave, it took several years before it reached 1 million. Internet was much faster. Now, Internet of Things, you talk about years. Well, in a couple of hours, you will reach about 1 million at this rate. More than 80% of the senior executives feel IoT is critical to their businesses. And although they don't know exactly how to handle this at this time, but they feel that it is critical to their business. So there is motivation, there is going to be push, there is going to be environment, and this is going to happen. Here is it's hard to read. That's why I thought I did, but this the last item, last point on this scale is 2025. So this is indicating that about 50 billion, 2020, 50 billion devices will be connected to Internet. This is the IoT projection for the global market forecast, and you can see it's about 1.5 trillion by 2025. And I think the important thing to know is the curve, exponential curve, that how fast it's increasing in both. And it's phenomenal growth, primarily because the price is very small, and the services going to provide is going to be excellent. So I think there is a need, there is a motivation, and there is a platform to provide that, so it will, it's going to happen. Here is some, based on the time that I have, I will not go through the example of all of these, but let me give you a few examples. IoT will be used in health, big time. My own personal passion is that how this technology, IoT and Internet of Things or other technologies can help the people who have physical disabilities, physical challenge. And as the first speaker mentioned about the vulnerable populations, I hope these can help. And there are examples, even not the technology as powerful as we have now, technologies have helped. There are people who are unable to walk because they are paralyzed. These technologies will help them to walk because they can wear wearable robots that can provide some muscle power, they can walk. There are people who are unable to communicate, they can communicate with the movement of their finger. Amazing things are happening. So, but IoT in health, you can actually wear your dress and with sensors, and it will be taking your vitals, and even when you're sleeping, it's taking your vitals. If your sugar level goes down, not only it will be able to inject the right amount of insulin, it will also call for help if needed. Now, I'm not recommending that everybody who's sleeping should wear these kind of sensors, or at least we hope that we will be able to disconnect some of these times. But these are going to provide a great service to this in almost all areas. Smart transportation, we already know. Self-driving cars are coming up. Cars talk to each other, cars talk to the road talks to the car, and so on. And just imagine that how this can help the vulnerable population who cannot drive. They can, it's actually, once you cannot do something and you have urge to do, and when you are able to do this, it becomes immense satisfaction. If a handicapped person who cannot drive or elderly person whose driving license has been taken away can sit in the car and say, well, take me to the mall. Obviously, that's a great feeling. So these cars are already available over there. And Internet of Things is at best display in those environments. Smart agriculture. A lot of countries where desert, their drip irrigation and so on has already used these kind of technologies to produce, not only increase the yield, but also to have selective areas where yield healthy crop and just use pesticides or fertilizers where exactly it's needed. These kind of technologies are helping. One of my friend who was president and CEO of AT&T Mobility was our own graduate, so I met with him a few times. Once I was talking to him and he says, the next big thing is really the sensors and IoT and so on, and we want to talk about smart dirt. I said, what do you mean smart dirt? He said, well, this is really the world population is increasing. By 2050, the population is expected to be about 10 billion. Water is going to be a big problem. And how do we resolve it? 80% of the water is being used in agriculture. And if we can save a little bit of this, that can feed that population increase. Absolutely. If you can put these sensors and connect that to Internet of Things, you can exactly find out that how much water is needed at what time and so on, and you can control that. You can save a lot of water to feed the population growth. Smart structures is another thing. A lot of people think about our infrastructure is going bad. Actually, the grade that's given to the infrastructure, the state of the structure, infrastructure at this time is not that great. So, but if we can put these sensors and Internet of Things on the structures, instead of us going proactively inspecting them, that whether there is a problem, this infrastructure will tell us that come and fix us because there is a crack developing in the bridge, or this railroad is heating up and it's crooked, et cetera, et cetera. So all those kind of things can actually happen. Smart energy, yeah, you may not have much control over this because all the devices in your house may be connected to the Internet of Things, and it can turn on the dishwasher when the energy is cheap. It can turn off this and turn off that and so on. All those kind of things can happen in the light of Internet of Things. Yes, it's going to create a lot of information, a lot of data. Sometimes we don't even know what we are going to do with that data, but that data will be collected and some patterns will be recognized and some decisions will be made, hopefully for the betterment. Okay, here are some of the challenges. Of course, no progress comes without challenges, but when challenges can be overcome and negative aspects are much lower than the positive aspects, then of course we go with the positive side and deal with the challenges or find the solutions for those ones. As I mentioned, that big data problem is going to become worse. It is going to generate a lot of information. And how you're going to manage it? Well, maybe quantum computing and those kind of things will help. Privacy and trust is going to be one of the big issues. That's really the biggest worry that people have, that when we go down to the level of small things being connected to the internet, it's a lot easier to penetrate from one of the endpoints, which is very vulnerable, and go and do worse things with the internet. Well, my take on this one is that privacy has always been a concern ever since the Constitution was written. So even at that time, technologies were not there, but privacy was a concern. It will remain concerned no matter what we do. Can we make things 100% secure? No. All we can do is probably stay ahead of the bad guys who are misguided and want to do bad things to hurt fellow human beings. So that's why the cybersecurity has become one of the big areas, and every university, every corporation is looking for those kind of people. Reliability and resilience is another aspect, a challenge, that how reliable these things are going to be. Can we bet our livelihood on this one, that they are going to be reliable or not? Well, that remains to be seen. Of course, when it comes to health issues, you may have seen on a video when we talk about drone ambulances, where the response time has become from 8 minutes to about 1 minute, and the life-saving activities, life-saving possibilities have increased much higher. So then, of course, you go with these kind of things and not pay attention to the challenges that we have. Governance is another issue. Internet of Things is so pervasive. Who is going to manage that? Who is going to govern that? Who is going to take the responsibility, and so on? Standards and policies, so that worldwide standards are there, so that once we talk about something, we can talk about it in the same language. That's going to be a concern. Source of energy, as I mentioned, is another challenge. And more importantly, education and level of comfort of people who are going to use these technologies. We need to make them, we like to put their concerns at ease, that no, this is going to be okay, no, this is going to be okay. Actually, one of my colleagues, her father is diabetic, and seriously diabetic, so they have to inject the insulin every now and then. So when the person is sleeping, it becomes a problem. So I suggested that why don't you go to this doctor who is using this sensor technology to help. Ever since they went to the doctor, they implanted a sensor over there, and his life has changed. He says, I don't worry about it when I go to sleep. I sleep with the peace of mind. I know that it will take care of it by itself, and so on. So these kind of things are happening, and Internet of Things is going to become more and more pervasive as we move along. So in summary, I've given you a brief history of this one, and we talked about IoT and what it is up to. We talked about some of the emerging applications and some of the challenges that we are facing. But challenges are challenges. We can always overcome them, and the trend is in the right direction, and we will keep on moving in that direction. So after the next speaker, I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have.